Hello and welcome to the Wellness Connection. I'm your host, Fiona Kane. Today, I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. Today, I'm going to be talking about my concerns in regards to children and trans ideology. Now, normally I don't really cover politics type discussions on this podcast. However, this has become a major health issue for the children involved. So I think it is really relevant to bring this up and to talk about this topic. Now, I would just like to start by saying some clarifying things to get started with because this is such a topic that triggers so many things that I just want to start by saying, okay, clarification. I don't have any issue with anyone, whatever, whether they're gay or straight or trans or whatever. I have no problem with individuals, and I always wish the best for people, and that people deserve to have a good life and to be healthy and well, and all those things. Right? This is not about that. What I'm going to be discussing today is about an ideology and about how I think the ideology might be damaging for children. Today, I'm not really going to be talking about adults because that's a whole different topic. And that's really, as far as I'm concerned, for the most part, or at least from the perspective of the discussion I'm having today, adults are a different category and that what they do is their own business. But for children, they need adults to protect them. And I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of quite hysterical information and hyperbolic statements and things that people say. So what I would like to do today is talk a little bit about the issue because I feel like a lot of people who watch this podcast, a lot of them are parents, and you might not have time to do a deep dive into some of these topics as much as I do. So really what I'm discussing today are my concerns around children being affected by trans ideology and some of the issues around that, some of my concerns, and that's the so you understand where I'm coming from. That's where I'm coming from today in regards to this topic. Now, I'd first start by saying that once upon a time, trans individuals, well, they were actually called transsexuals, and a transsexual was, in general, it was more men who wanted to be a woman. It wasn't the other way around. There was very rare that there were women who considered themselves transsexual. They were usually men, and often men who'd been thinking about this for a long time and did what they call a transition, which is where they do hormones and maybe surgeries to become, well, you can't change sex, so you can't actually become a woman, but to pass as a woman. So that is what it historically was, and it was very rare the other way around, and it was a very small percentage of people. And for the most part, these people, just they just people with dignity. They got on with their life, and they weren't kind of getting all politically active and trying to invade women's spaces and things like that. Well, unfortunately, things have changed a lot over the last few years. And what we've seen, if you look at the data, I don't have it right in front of me, but the increase in, it's actually 3-1 to girls changing over now to girls who believe that they are trans, and they call it transsexual. I'm sorry, they call it, oh, my brain's gone. So it was transsexual, and now it's yeah, my brain's not going to go there. I'll get there in a moment. Transgender, that's what they call it. And it's 3-1 with girls, so more girls than boys, right? So that's very unusual. And so we've got to think about, like, where is this coming from? Why suddenly it's like 3-1 with girls? And when you look at a lot of the statistics and graphics, it's huge. It's just such a huge thing for girls. So I'm going to be just talking a little bit about that as well and why that might be. And I don't think it's just organic. I think a lot to do with activism. So anyway, and what I would also like to say is that, like, in my opinion, look, what has happened in this activism area, is they've gone around and changed a lot of language, and I don't think the changes are appropriate, and I reject most of the changes, if not all of them. So, as far as I'm concerned, you're not transgender, you're transsexual. And even then, most people who would define themselves that way, I actually don't believe really are. And I will talk about that and talk about why. Uh, Also, what they've done is they've co-opted the word gender. So previously, gender was used interchangeably with the word sex. And I think it was just kind of a softer word for sex. So, because sex is not just a category of man or woman, but it's also an act. And I think just because it was an act, they kind of used the word gender as a little bit more of a softer way of talking about what roles of men and women and how you define men and women, as opposed to using the word sex. So previously, that's how you would understand the word gender, or they would just talk about gender roles, but you could talk about sex roles as well. But they normally use the word gender roles. What's happened now is they've changed, the activists have changed the meaning of the word gender, and they've changed it to mean gender expression. And what they mean by that is they mean how you feel inside about who you are, not your actual biological sex, but how you may feel. So it's your gender expression. And depending on who you talk to, there could be anywhere from 3 genders to unlimited, because it's all about how you feel, right? So that's what they've done with the language, and I personally reject that. I think Billboard Chris, you could Google him, he's great. I agree with what he says. I think he explains it very well. He says there are 2 sexes, male and female, there are 0 genders, and there are infinite personalities. And I agree with him. I think a lot of our mix up about this gender ideology is that they've broadened the definition so much that really just anyone who just likes to dress a bit different, maybe a boy who's a bit more feminine or a girl who's a bit less feminine, suddenly they're caught up in the net of having to fit into some category of being trans when they're just a little bit different to the other kids, right? So I agree with him, and I reject the whole idea of gender in the way that they use it. Also, too, it's important to note another form of language that they use when they refer to the sex that someone was born as. They don't even say they were born this way. They say sex that was assigned at birth. And sex is not assigned at birth, it is observed at birth. And in the majority of cases, except for people with what's called DSDs, disordered of sex difference, which is used to be called intersex, except for those people where sometimes it's a bit confusing when they're younger, the majority of people, it is very clear and it is observed, not assigned. The doctor doesn't just say, "Oh, what do we think this child might be? Let's just decide it's a girl." They observe that very definitely it is a girl. Now, people with intersex or DSDs, a small percentage of people, but those people, they're not a third sex. They still ultimately end up being either a boy or a girl. They might have extra organs and extra bits, but I'll give you an example of what I mean. For those of you who saw the Olympics in France and remember seeing the female boxing champion, who was actually a man, well, he is an example of someone who is DSD. So he was born, when he was born, he would have would have been hard to tell because he would have been born with a very small penis that probably looked like it might have been a vagina, hard to tell, right? And for that reason, he would have been identified as a girl when he was born. But quite clearly, as he grew, he did have. I've got to remember all the terminologies. He did have testes, but they were internal. And but when he got to his puberty years, what would have happened is the testes would have started working and they would have started to produce lots and lots of testosterone. And that is when it would have been very clear that, oh, okay, this is someone with DSD, and his gender expression is the term that they like to use, but the way he ultimately what he is a man. So even people with DSD, they are one or the other, but they've just got like a dominant one that sometimes it's unclear. When they go through puberty, it becomes a lot clearer. And even if they've got extra bits, like if they might have ovaries as well as testicles, or I can't remember, or they might have other female bits inside or whatever, they still will be one or the other. So that is the other thing too, because people with DSDs are often the example given for why there's more than one sex. More than two sexes. No, there is not. It's like saying some people are born without an arm, so then there's a third type of human being. No, there's not. There's just some people born with different differences. However, there still is sex, male and female. They're the only two sexes. And so the next thing is in regards to with these this 3-to-1 ratio now we've got of biological girls believing that they are born in the wrong body. Look, one hypothesis is that, there's greater acceptance now, and that is why, and isn't it wonderful that we're such an accepting society? And, and now people feel that they're safe to come out and say what they truly are. And maybe there's a small amount of that. You could not rule out that there's some people that would be the case. However, I actually think it's a lot. I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's lots of things going on here, and we don't suddenly have thousands and thousands of girls who suddenly feel safe to come out and say they are that they are the opposite sex. And a lot of it too is about what you see and what you're exposed to. So when we look at history back in about 2015, that's when we started seeing a lot more of it in the world, and we lived a lot more online and saw a lot more going on. So that is when Bruce Jenner did his Vanity Fair cover, and as a woman, not that he is a woman, but he has transitioned and believes he is a woman, and gives himself a, what does he call himself? Not Caitlyn now. And that is when Jennings did the TV show. Jennings was a small, I think, a young boy who thought he was a girl, and he did a TV show where he transitioned. And that's heartbreaking. If you see any of that show, you go back and watch it. It is just heartbreaking. The that child is just that. Yeah. Anyway, I see everything around that as being abuse. The way that child was expected to play a certain role, and then the child was saying, "Oh, I think I'm not really trans," but it's sort of too late. Once you're on the trans train, you can't disappoint your parents and disappoint the people around you. And for children who get TV contracts and things out of it, there's a lot riding on it. It could be the family's income that's relying on you playing your role as someone who's trans. And you see some episodes where this on, and the surgeries and how damaging the surgeries were and how they didn't work, and it's horrifying. Anyway, that sort of was around in about 2015. I think Nature magazine, they redefined sex. They changed it to a spectrum. That's when gay marriage was legalized in the US. And I've heard some, Douglas Murray says this, which I think is interesting. Douglas Murray is a gay man and a very brilliant thinker and speaker and writer. And he said that it was kind of like what happened is we got to a place in the Western world where, there was a really good reason that, there was a fight for gay rights and equality and all of those things. And that was really important, and they were really treated terribly once upon a time in the Western world, and now they're not, which is amazing, which is great. And he said that it's like what happened is we got to that point where everything was okay, and so all of those charities and non-governmental organisations and activist groups, they had nothing left to do because they pretty much had achieved equality. So what they did is they jumped on the trans thing because they got the kind of gay rights, and I think he's right about a lot of it. These people just want something to they want something to scream and yell about, and when they didn't have it anymore, they came up with something else. So anyway, what happened is so all of those things happened in around 2015, and things started to change then. And then there's a sort of concept creep thing that Colin Wright talks about, and he's talked about it. He's a biologist, and he's talked about this in one of his Gen Spect conference appearances recently, and he was talking about how, once upon a time they had what they used to call shell shock, which is what they defined the mental damage that people would come home with from war. And then they now they call it PTSD, and then and now they've gone on to include lots of different types of trauma, and trauma is pretty much everything and anything now. So everyone's experienced trauma, and so everyone has PTSD. Not everyone, but it's become a bit like that. I'm not saying it's not ever justified. No, of course not. But what happens is, I think a lot of these things, they get expanded so much that they almost become meaningless. And there are people in there, it's very real and it's very true, but it gets expanded to the extent that, everyone's got PTSD or everyone has trauma. And that's what's happened with a lot of these trans definitions as well. I'll sort of go into that a little bit more. So basically what it means to be trans, it has shifted, and now it's become what they call an umbrella term. And I'm just going to go into here. Yeah, so it sort of says here that sort of since this is from Colin Wright's talk. He said, since the 1990s, the word transgender has been used primarily as an umbrella term to describe those people who defy societal expectations and assumptions regarding gender. It includes people who are transsexual and intersex, but also those who identify outside female, male binary roles, and those whose gender expression and behaviour differs from societal expectations. That's so many people. So that just includes any woman that doesn't like dressing up in a feminine way or wearing makeup or whatever, or any guy that's just a bit feminine. Like that's that's what I was saying before, that creep where it expands so much that it becomes meaningless, because that just covers. That's why you can include a whole bunch of people now, because it's expanded so much that it's everybody. The next thing I wanted to talk about, and I just think this is an important part of it, just this history part of it, just so you can kind of see where these things come about. And then I'll talk specifically about my concerns in regards to children. So the other thing is, like, when we look at, things like, Planned Parenthood in the US, they say, gender is much more complex as a societal and legal status and set of expectations from society about characteristics and thoughts. And then they say the gender binary is the idea that gender is strictly an either-or option. And then again, it's about gender expressions. And they talk about what is quite interesting. I'll sort of go through here. Again, it's the American Psychology Association say transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity or gender expression and behaviour does not conform, typically associated with sex that they were assigned at birth. So a lot of it's just about your behaviour, right? Which comes back to Billboard Chris and his, two sexes, zero genders, and infinite personalities. A lot of this is just about your personality. Why do we have to create sort of medical terminology and psychology terminology or whatever to just describe someone's personality? So we put everyone in an umbrella. And it's interesting because a lot of these people are the people that were sort of saying, don't fence me in and don't call me certain things, and you don't have to name me or define me. And then they're defining. They're doing that, right? So it's just weird. So the other thing, again, it's like the American Psychiatric Association. Again, they're talking about traditional expectations. So they're saying here that it's the gender expression is the outward manifestation of a person's gender, which may or may not reflect their inner gender or gender based on traditional expectations. And so if it's about what's based on traditional expectations, does that mean that you would be trans in, I don't know, Australia? But if you went to a different country that had different expectations of your sex, that you no longer would be trans? You get on a plane, go somewhere, you're no longer trans because now you've gone to somewhere with different expectations? So much of this is just this subjective nonsense, honestly. So essentially, it's like if your expression or behavior is different from what society would expect, apparently that means you're trans. And therein lies the issue with when they have the whole LGB, I don't know what it is now, there's lots of letters and pluses and everything else. But when they have that, the problem is now that the LGB, so lesbians, gay, and bisexual, have been left behind by the T, because essentially what they're saying now is what they're doing and what is happening now, and this is my concern about young children, is they are transing children who would have just ended up being either just a quirky girl who doesn't like to dress in dresses or whatever, or a boy who likes to dress in dresses, but otherwise they're just boy or girl, or they just may or may not be gay, right? So what they're doing now, though, is those kids, instead of saying, "Oh yeah, all right, you just don't like dresses, that's fine," and so many girls have gone through that stage too, where they were a real tomboy when they were younger and they become quite feminine when they're older, and others don't. Again, that's fine. But now what they're doing is they're transing these kids. They're saying, well, you're born in the wrong body. And therein lies my issue. It's like gender expression, go for your life. And it's this ain't new, guys. Like David Bowie and Mick Jagger were doing this in the 60s. They were wearing dresses and makeup and stuff like that. It's not a new thing, and no one trans them and cut their bits off or anything, and they just went on throughout their lives and, just were able to be who they wanted to be when they were that person. It was fine, right? So this whole what's his name? The guy from One Direction who likes to wear dresses a lot. Everyone's acting like, oh, it's the first guy that's ever done that. No, that Mick and David were doing it in the 60s. What's his name? Oh, he's not on the top of my lips. The pretty one who's an actor now as well. Harry. I think it might be Harry. So anyway, good on him. Fine, but it's not new, and that's fine. And yes, you can dress in a dress and not have to be trans as well. And the problem is, it's actually a lot of the gay children that are being damaged by this, or just kids that don't like dressing up in the way that they might have been expected to. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But what's happening now is what we're seeing is this rapid growing number of girls identifying as boys, and they're calling it gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is becoming sort of almost like a social contagion. And I'll talk to you about some of the reasons why this might be such a big deal for girls who now think that they're boys, right? So there's a few reasons why this can be, and I'm actually going to go through it in more detail when I talk about. Actually, I might even make it another episode. I think I'll do an episode where I'm going to be talking about uh, someone who is a detransitioner, so a young woman who thought that she was a boy and started doing all the transitioning, and then later realized that no, she really was a girl. And I might go through her story a bit slower and in another episode so that you can get the gist of this. So please, if you're not really sure about this one, please watch that one too. I'll probably make it the next episode so that you can get the full idea of what my concern with the children. So what's happening now is that, so people used to become a transsexual, and they used to have, they would have these, which is invasive and irreversible medications and surgeries, but instead of calling it gender reassignment, now we call it gender-affirming care. Well, I don't, but that is the definition of it now. It's called gender-affirming care. And gender-affirming care is, unfortunately, the problem with it is because, okay, I know that people might say, well, it's probably not happening hardly at all, and yes, it does happen in Australia and in the US, and I've got people who watch from all over the place, but there are young children being put on puberty blockers. The activists say they are fully reversible and don't cause any harm, but it's simply not true. And there is a report called the Cass report, which is a very thorough report done by a doctor called Hilary Cass, who looked at this in detail. It is simply not true. These puberty blockers are damaging children. They previously used with children who had precocious puberty. So if you have, say, a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old who starts going through puberty, they would put them on it to block their puberty because it was considered that the risks would be worth it based on going through puberty that early is probably not a good idea. And even then, there's definitely risks associated, but there was kind of a purpose behind it. Now what they do is they do it. They say it's kind of a pause button, and we'll just do a pause, but they do it for children who would probably be getting to a time where they're about to go through puberty. And what they're finding is that once they do this, they actually don't go through puberty. And the ideologues would think that's a good thing, but the problem is that you need to go through puberty, and puberty is a really important part, not just about sex, but for so many reasons that puberty is important. But also, most of these children, interesting fact, fun fact, is puberty is historically we've known that puberty is the solution for this gender dysphoria in something like 85 to 95% of cases. So letting the children just go through puberty usually fixes the problem. So anything that stops it from happening, and often I think if not always stops it from happening for good, depending on how long you're on those puberty blockers for, not a good thing. But there's also other health issues surrounded with this, which is what happens is a lot of these children end up going through, and I don't know if it's a combination of the blockers and then this cross-sex hormones they go on, or one or the other, or both. But anyway, a lot of them, they start going through menopause. So they go through menopause when they're in their teens or their early 20s, right? And so we don't want these sorts of issues where they're having issues with bone density and losing their hair and sort of male pattern baldness and all sorts of issues. We don't want that happening to young women or just young people. And so they're given this this is all gender affirming care. And you might say, well, look, they wouldn't do it unless they were really sure, and I'm sure they're getting assessed and blah, blah, blah. No. So in Australia, it is legal to do things like what they call top surgery, because they like giving things names that sound nice. But top surgery is a double mastectomy. They're giving these to girls who are, I think, 16 or maybe 17 in Australia. So they are not 18, and they don't understand the ramifications of this. And what they also don't understand is one of the problems with the the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones is in many cases they make you infertile forever. And they also will affect your ability to enjoy sex, so they could actually stop you from ever being able to orgasm. And you may or may not think that's important, but I don't think we're allowed to make that decision for children. I think that they should be allowed to grow up and figure that out for themselves and decide what they do and don't want. But us taking away that important right of theirs to grow up to be able to have those experiences, I don't think there's any adult who should be allowed to make that choice on behalf of children. Children don't know. Their brains don't finish developing until we're around 25. But we think an 11-year-old knows whether or not they want to have children or may ever want to have pleasure in sex, right? Seriously, this is a big problem for children. So the other thing is too that what's happened is around the world, because these activism has gone through all of the medical associations and the psychological associations and things. What happens now is if you take your child to a therapist, more often than not in Western countries, including Australia, they are expected to do what is called affirmation-only therapy. And affirmation-only therapy is saying, yes, you really are in the wrong body. Let's help you transition when the time comes. But that's the only therapy that they're allowed to do. So if they say, well, maybe you were born in the wrong body, maybe not, let's spend some time exploring that. If they do that, that's actually not considered good practice anymore. And in some places, they can get in a lot of trouble for that and lose their jobs. So, and what they're doing now is, again, I said they changed language? Well, they're changing language, because what they've done is they've taken away So there used to be something called what was it called? Oh, gay conversion therapy, right? So conversion therapy was a terrible, terrible thing, and it was a therapy where they did things like electric shock treatments and things to try and take the gay away from someone. So they were literally trying to stop people from being gay and make them be straight, which I don't believe you can do, but anyway. And they did horrific things to people in the name of this conversion therapy. So, what you hear them now talk about, what activists talk about now, is they talk about conversion therapy and how these people want to do conversion therapy and how we need to ban it. Well, what conversion therapy is now, you've got to just pay attention to the language because it's all changed. So, you just can't assume because things sound like, oh, well, yeah, ban conversion therapy. Yes, I agree with that. And if it was the old kind, I would be right with you. I'd be signing that petition. But what conversion therapy means now is what I just described to you in regards to exploring things with the child who comes in or who wants to transition. So, conversion therapy is classed as anything except for affirmation. So, if you don't say, yes, you're definitely in the wrong body, yes, let's just go down that one path and that one path only, because there could be no other reasons, then that is classed as conversion therapy. Just saying, hey, let's explore this. Maybe, maybe not, but let's explore it. And that is so ridiculous because the whole thing about psychology, Jordan Peterson talks about this, a famous psychologist. He says that you don't affirm anyone when they come to you as a psychology patient. You don't say, yeah, okay, you've come here, you've got all these issues, but yes, you're right about everything. No, you help them explore what's going on with their thought process that could be an issue. And therein lies the issue as well, that it used to be gender dysphoria, which is what this is kind of called, where you do feel like maybe you were born in the wrong body. That was it was classed as in the DSM manual. So you could so it would be a mental health issue. And now what they've done, I don't know if they've removed it or they're removing it, and they're kind of taking it away, and because it's like no longer a mental health issue, it's just how you feel, and it's just something that we all have to just affirm. So they've actually taken something that is actually a mental health issue and turned it into an issue that you can't question, that you must affirm, and that person is absolutely right every single time. Even though we know that previously 85 to 95%, somewhere in that amount, I think it was closer to 95% of people, once they went through puberty, they were fine. And they weren't trans, they went on with their life and they didn't need any of that and they were perfectly fine. So we know that puberty is the cure. But what we're doing now is we're actually sort of just saying, oh, yes, all 100% of people who say that just are. We're going to agree with it, we're going to go along with it. And in regards to the detransition thing, the people who on the other side who realize that they've made a mistake, it's popular in the trans activist community to say that it's only 1% of people. In more recent times, they've actually WPATH have been more honest about it. WPATH are that they are an activist organisation who are trying to pretend they're a medical organisation, and they're the experts on and on gender affirming care and how it should be done, and policies and processes and all of that. So they've kind of come along, wolf in sheep's clothing, and pretended they're a medical organisation when they are an activist organisation, and they're the ones that have tricked all of these associations and medical people, everything, to get involved in this stuff. And it's now sort of becoming clearer and clearer that WPATH are not who they said they were. They are an activist-run organisation, not working on science, that is for sure. But anyway, even now they are saying it's more like 30%. Are regretting these transitions. And when you consider that some of what they have done is irreversible and life-changing forever, and these essentially, once you get into the medical side of this stuff, most of these people will be lifetime medical patients, and often with a shortened life expectancy because of the health issues associated with these things. It's a major issue. The 30% is a major issue. I think 30% is way more than that because, like I said, it used to be 95% of people, even if I'm wrong, and it's more like 85%, that's most people were fine and didn't need those changes. So doing this whole like affirmation only therapy is so dangerous because so many people change their minds. And the issue is, in regards to this, is as far as as far as the when they'd refer to studies and they used to say 1% and all that sort of stuff, what they did is they only followed up people in the first 3 months after their surgery. And what we do know, and I'll go into it more when I talk about this detransitioner story, but what we do know is the first 3 months after surgery, people do have what they describe as a euphoria, a trans euphoria. And they feel like, because they've been told that the solution to all their problems is changing their sex. They have been told that the reason they're having mental health issues, or the reason they feel bad about their body, or the reason they feel bad about themselves is because they've been born in the wrong body. That's the only reason it could possibly be. And so they are told that once they do the transition, in inverted commas, and become the opposite sex, which they actually can't. However, they're sold this bill of goods that is not true, that everything will be fine, all of their mental health issues will go away, and they will feel fabulous, and it'll be wonderful. So initially they do have, like, they're elated because maybe this has been a process that's been going for years, and they're finally doing it, and they're finally going to be okay. So they do have that, but that does not last. And what we do know is the rates of I'm careful with the language because of YouTube, but the rates of life-ending choices that these people make goes back to the same as it was before they had the surgery, up within 12 months of the surgery. So these people they've already got mental health issues, and the rates of whether or not they act on that in a terrible way does not change, except for that first sort of 12 months they feel good about the surgery. Most of them regret it, not after that 12 months, and or most, okay, well, many, I'll just say many of them regret it after that. Not most, but many. And what we also find is that these people don't tend to go back to their doctors because they don't want to go back to the people who they feel lied to them and butchered them. So that's also why there's a lack of data about people who detransition, because they will not go back to those doctors. The third thing is that when Hilary Cass did the Cass report, which was this really thorough report that looked at this and looked at the problems with children around this, is what she found is that she was asking for data, and the clinics were not they just weren't keeping the data, and that's a great trick to do when you want statistics to sit well with you, is just don't ask the question. Don't ask the question, don't keep the stats. And then then you can keep saying there's only 1% detransitioners. You know it's not true, but hey, you're not counting, so you don't have to tell them, right? And what happened is there was one particular doctor. Now, I've talked about this before on another podcast, but there's one particular doctor who recently, and she's one of these doctors that does this gender-affirming care medicine, they call it. She does the surgeries, and she's very proud of it, and she thinks what she's doing is a wonderful thing. And she started looking more at the data to sort of, because she wanted to go into the data to prove that she was right and that what she was doing was making the children's lives better, and it was making a difference, and wasn't it such a great thing she was doing. And the data didn't actually support her, and so she didn't release that data. Later on it got found, but she didn't release the data because it didn't support her hypothesis, and she's still doing it. So she's done her own research and found out that she is damaging children and not helping them, and she's still doing it and just won't release the data because it doesn't go along with her beliefs, because this is about activism. And I just want to explain to you a little bit more about, from an activism point of view, what this is. So trans activism entails a view that philosophically, politically, and socially, betterment involves the decimation of the powerful and the liberation of the vulnerable. In this case, the vulnerable are trans people, especially, well, depending on where you are, but it's trans people who are that they call people of color, which is a term that they use in the US. Since trans people endure suffering, which strikes any sane person as a result of the confused idea that you were born in the wrong body. But the suffering must be imposed by an oppressor. So instead of the fact that they're suffering because they have mental health issues, some of them are autistic, some of them and so autism is kind of why this has come about in those cases. Some of them are people who have been assaulted, sexually assaulted, or those sorts of issues, or been through some other childhood trauma that has caused this to come on. But instead of saying it could be something like that, it's just the only reason that these trans people could be having mental health issues or having issues is because there's got to be an oppressor. And this is the whole like Marxist theory thing that's come about now, where the whole world is divided into oppressor and oppressed. And so the way the activism sees it is these people are oppressed, and essentially who they're oppressed by, well, they're oppressed by what they call the cis hetero patriarchy colonials. And essentially that's people who I'm classed, I reject the term, but I am classed as cis because I'm a woman who identifies as woman. Hetero, so I'm heterosexual, white because it's, of course, and but also the patriarchy, right? Oh, and the colonialists, because that's just Marxism 101, right? So they're all the oppressors. So this activism is about that. So the activism is actually, and this is what you see the activist groups do, it's about creating an oppressed class. And they tell people who identify as trans, which is such a huge um, cohort of people now because the definition is so broad. They tell them that they are oppressed and that people hate them and people are out to get them. They refer to trans genocide. Where? Like, where are all the dead bodies, like the transgender? So they use all of this really hyperbolic language. So they essentially train these kids into thinking that they're oppressed. They tell these kids that they are likely to end their lives if they don't get the affirming care they deserve. They tell these kids that if people don't use their preferred pronouns or don't accept them, blah blah blah, that means they're hateful and they don't want them to exist. And so they basically just they're fodder for these activists, and they just turn these children and these young people into perpetual victims, where largely these things just are not true. But you convince it's really easy to convince the children that it is true when they're being persecuted and they're oppressed, and that is why they freak out so much. And the smallest thing, or if someone doesn't use their preferred pronouns or whatever it is. So this is actually like a revolution, but instead of being like this top down revolution, what they're doing is they're sort of basically creating these damaged children who will ultimately be angry and will fight a revolution, because I would be angry if adults had let me down this much and let me harm my body and harm myself in this kind of way. And essentially it kind of champions the whole mental health and victim status, which is what this whole oppressor oppressed thing does. So children actually want to. This is part of that whole uh, contagion thing, especially with young women, is first of all, kids, they want to be revolutionaries and they want to be activists and they want to stand up to the man and all that, because I wanted to do that when I was young too. So it's like really, really normal that they want to do that. So they want to sort of stand up for the oppressed or be in the oppressed club. And and the last thing they want to be is the oppressor. So if you think about this, and this is why so many of them call themselves non-binary. As far as I'm concerned, non-binary means nothing. It just means special and different, as opposed to being straight. I think that what happens is, when you think about the fact that at the moment in our society, because of all of this Marxism that's going on with this trans ideology, is the worst thing that you can be is an oppressor. An oppressor is someone who is straight and what they call cisgendered, which I said before is just means that you are the sex that you were born as and you believe you are, and heteronormative, which means that you're heterosexual, and generally white comes into it as well. I don't like to sort of bring up all the race stuff, but it's just part of it, right? That kind of all goes together. So if you think that you are part of that community, and that community is the worst community to be part of because they're oppressors and they're horrible and they're mean and all that kind of stuff, you would want to identify as being one of the oppressed group, so that's one of the reasons as well, that it's a social contagion. And of course, there always has been social contagions with young girls. Like when I was younger, it was anorexia and bulimia, and in more recent years, even just the last couple of years, on TikTok, there's been an explosion of young women who have been diagnosed with things like Tourette syndrome, and it's because they're watching these influencers with Tourette's, and these girls are starting to and they know it's from the influencers, because not only do they have Tourette's, but they're saying the things in the accent of the influencers, which is a different accent to their own. So they're suddenly using like a British accent or something when they're American. So we know that girls are very vulnerable to this. We're very vulnerable to trends doing, and the other thing that, in previous years, and there's still a thing, I think, is like the cutting thing that a lot of young girls have been doing. So girls are very vulnerable to that. We're also very vulnerable to, you know, uh, puberty is really tough, and I don't know, I can't say what it's like for young boys. I haven't been there. I'm sure they have their own things that are tough about it. It is very tough for young girls, because we suddenly go from being like one of the boys, and we can do things with the boys and hang out with the boys and whatever, to being different and being looked at different. Maybe people are starting to uh, gawk at you, and you start suddenly getting men looking at you differently, which is very uncomfortable when you're a young girl, and suddenly men are just looking at you with that lascivious sort of, oh, it's just so awful, and you don't really fully understand it when you're young. You don't quite know what's going on, but you just know that it's very uncomfortable, and start getting even maybe people who think that they can touch you, or they're poking at you, or they're and everyone feels like they're allowed to comment about your body and your body changes, and it's so challenging on so many levels, and for girls as well, because we get periods and all the things that make it tough, and you're wanting to do sport, and you're wanting to and you get period, and it's swimming, whatever, all things that are just really, really challenging. So it is really, really hard for young girls. And the best of times, there's always been social contagion with young girls doing all sorts of stupid crap to because they should be thin, or this or that or whatever. This, I think, is just another one of those. But the only problem is, well, obviously with things like if dietary stuff, things go on for too long, they also are permanent damage to someone. But this ideology has the potential to do a lot of damage very quickly. That is irreversible for young people, and young people. So making these choices is very, very scary and sad. I will do another episode where I talk about this detransition story, because this episode has already gone on for too long. I just want to emphasize again that, honestly, my heart goes out to anyone who feels like they are transgender, or identifies as transgender, or maybe has a child who is in this situation. I'm not here to make a judgment on those situations, just to sort of let you know that there's so much political stuff that has happened over the last few years, and so much this ideology went through the universities years ago. It's in our schools now. It's gone through many institutions. Everyone's supposed to put a pronoun on their email address, blah blah blah. It's gone through so many places now. It's infected so many places that this issue is super complicated now, because it's the terminologies and it's understanding the terminology, and so much of it is also it's introduced to us in the form of kindness and inclusion, and but kindness and compassion, right? And I'm all about compassion and kindness and inclusion. However, my compassion is for the children who are being damaged. My compassion is to make sure that the children get the help that they need, and very few of those, if ever, will be needing to change their sex. Not that you can actually do that, but in whatever way that makes them pass or whatever. I My concern is the damage being done to children in the name of kindness and compassion, that is damaging a whole lot, just to serve a small number of people who may ultimately need these interventions. And you don't just go in. If you knew that, no, there were out of every 100 kids, X amount of them were going to develop a certain cancer, would you cut off the bits of all of them just in case, because you know that one of them might end up with a cancer? No, we don't do that. Well, this is the same thing. What we're saying is that maybe one of these children might end up being someone who would have preferred to have transitioned when they were younger and was happy if they've transitioned and blah, 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 which is like wonderful for that child. However, what we're saying is we'll damage 100, we'll damage them all just in case that we might save one. And the way I see it is, no, you save them all and then you help the one, rather than trying to change them all and tell them all there's something they're not. And I think it's very confusing to young people when you tell them, when you lie to them and telling them that they can change their sex or that they were born in the wrong body. As far as calling that affirmation, now affirmation is teaching them that they are okay as they are, that they're beautiful as they are. The body that they were born into is the body that they're meant to have, and that they can learn how to be safe in that body. And it might take some time, and you can support them with that, and they might have the therapy for that, but that it'll be fine and it'll be wonderful. And actually, ultimately, they'll be really glad they have that body, and that body will be great for them later, and they'll be able to have pleasure from it, when they're older, and just all of the great things that you can have from the human body that we don't want to interfere with now. So affirmation to me is actually confirming to the child that they are in the right body. And I couldn't think of anything more damaging than actually saying you were born in the wrong body and you can only ever be okay. You can only ever be happy and have a fulfilled life and only ever avoid ending your life if you go and get hormones and surgeries and that's how is that compassionate? And that's the thing too. They've changed all the terms around. So the terms that they say compassion, but that compassion, that's what compassion means to them. To me, that's not compassionate. And as for being inclusive, again, yes, look, what I was talking about before in regards to dress how you want, be who you want, whatever. Great. Inclusion, be who you want. Wonderful. Don't start letting men punch women out in the Olympics in the name of inclusion and call him a woman. That's not inclusive. That doesn't include women. That only includes that man or a small number of men. So again, we get to use the word inclusion, but inclusion actually means we're not including women and girls, and we're not looking at women and girls' safety. Inclusion also means we're not including people who are gay, because a lot of this ideology really damages those people because it forces them to have surgeries and things that they would have not otherwise had. They just would have grown up to be gay. So it's very damaging. And so inclusion is, it's not the terminology that is, like I said, just all of the words. Be aware any language that's used is it's often language that's been changed, that has a different meaning to what they're saying, and so most of us want to be caring and want to be inclusive in some way and want to be compassionate. And what I'm saying to you, in my opinion, compassion actually comes from acknowledging truth, but also being very caring and supporting people who are going through these issues, and understanding that it's especially challenging because there's such conflicting information, and there's so many medical people who have been supporting this. A lot of it has been changing, and probably in my next episode where I do talk about this detransitioner, I'll talk a little bit about swing back with this and the CAS report and evidence that sort of supports what I'm saying here as well. Anyway, my intention is not to harm people, and anyone who says what I'm saying gets called transphobic. I'm not afraid of trans people. I'm just afraid for what might happen to children who get damaged by this ideology, and I'm not anti people being who they want to be. I'm just very concerned for people's health and mental health, and I think this is becoming quite a big issue in the Western world. And I think that what we do is we use terms like you're transphobic, and all the different language that's used. A lot of that is used today to stop conversation. And I think that we need to have what I say about this podcast is it's important conversations about things that matter. This really matters, and it's a really important conversation. So I think we need to be able to have the conversation without fear of being labelled all sorts of things. And if people want to label me all sorts of things, so be it. Also, I'll just clarify that I am always happy to have discussions about this, but I will only engage in good faith conversations where people are being honest and really wanting to engage in the topic and discuss this as opposed to people who are just abusive for abuse sake. Anyone who comes at this from an abusive place, not interested in having a conversation, but having I like to have important conversations about things that matter. I'm happy to do that, but not. Just don't engage with people who just want to be abusive, because that doesn't support or help anything. Anyway, I will do another episode following up on some of the things I've talked about. Sorry, it's been such a long episode. This is such a big topic, and so much to cover. But I just feel like it's, like I said, I've been able to have a much deeper dive into this than maybe a lot of parents have. I'm not saying all, but many, just because you don't have time because you've got kids, and that's fine. So I just want you to understand the sorts of stuff that's going on that might be affecting your children, so you can be a bit more prepared to deal with it. And if this is just opening up a conversation as well, that's fine. I am always happy. Like, I'm open to things, and I want to hear if I turn out to be wrong with things, I will acknowledge that and I engage with that. But this is something I have been following for a really, really long time. And in the beginning, I was quite supportive about it all. But as time went on and more evidence came through, it became very clear to me that this is more damaging than anything, this ideology. And so, if I get proved otherwise, sure, I'm happy to look at that. But at this stage, that's why I feel so confident to have this conversation, is all the evidence is pointing in the direction that this is very damaging ideology, and that's why I think it's really important to have the discussion. And I think adults need to be armed with this information so that they can protect children. Anyway, I will follow up with another episode next week, most likely, where I talk about this transition. Actually, I might even just record it very soon. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and share, and tell other people about this. Like I said, I'm trying to have important conversations about things that matter. And I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye.